At one time, in the far reaches of West Texas, existed a town built by the largest silver boom the state has ever seen. Now all that remains of Shafter are a handful of hardy souls, the historic foundations of the old ghost town deteriorating in the desert sun, and a cemetery unlike anything you've probably ever seen, filled with crosses marking more dead than you'll find living in this part of Texas.
This one here you can actually see after the coffin rotted, it collapsed, dished out like a bowl.
Probably one of the most interesting and well-preserved pieces of Shafter history happens to be the cemetery. So we're starting out here at the cemetery.
This one here reminds me of something you'd see on an old church down south. Like the bell would be inside that. It'd be up top on a church somewhere.
To be honest, I find it totally fascinating. I thought the cemetery in Thurber was really cool, but this surpasses that, at least in my opinion.
This is definitely one of the oldest cemeteries that I've ever seen.
It feels as if I stepped into a scene of a Western. Specifically, the movie The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, the final scenes of that movie where you see the rows and rows of crosses in that cemetery. That's what this place reminds me of, because you have the rows and rows of crosses that have been here for a really long time.
How old is this cross to be weathered that bad? Really old.
You just have to wonder, who were the people? You know, what were their names? What did they do? What were their lives like here? And I guess looking out and seeing the sea of crosses, so many of them unmarked other than the cross, it just gives you such a sense of wonder, and I don't know, it's hard to put my finger on it other than just a feeling of peace, maybe. It's really quiet here, other than a little bit of sound of the traffic.
Oh, you can see where the crypt is cracked and fallen in. Maybe from an earthquake.
But the scenery around is amazing, and so if you were to pick your perfect final resting place, I guess right here, just underneath the mountains, at the foot of the mountains, would be probably the ideal spot. And then again, maybe for some it wouldn't. You know, maybe they'd prefer to be in some kind of tropical beach somewhere, you know, overlooking the ocean. Or maybe actually in the ocean. You know, this is one of those topics that's really hard for people to talk about generally, because people don't like to plan for their end, for their final days, because I guess it's that ego inside us that has us thinking that we ought to live forever, which we know isn't the case, being human. No doubt, in a cemetery of this size, there are those buried here whose final resting place is unmarked for the living to find. Yet, even of those whose remains can be found, with names faded and memories gone, as their bones turn to dust, all that's left of their stories is a passing thought. There's just so much history here, and unfortunately, because the graves can't speak to us, we don't know what it is, and so we're left here with the wonder.
This one here you can actually see part of the fencing is still intact. It's made out of the wood. Wonder how old this one is.
And, if I may add, amazement over such a historic place. Now, fortunately, it just so happens that right across from the cemetery is the Shafter Memorial Historical Site. So maybe, if we're lucky, we'll be able to find out some of the unique history about Shafter. Marty's already beat me to it, opening up the first of what looks like many boxes here of Shafter history. So what'd you find out, Marty?
The only thing that I'm most interested in is walking around that old cemetery. It's surprising to find out, you know, I would have said a few hundred, but 2,000 graves are marked by stones, metal, and wood crosses in that cemetery.
Unfortunately, because of the way the lighting is here and the fact that these are all behind, like, I'm assuming plexiglass or something of that nature, the reflection of the lighting isn't allowing me to get real good pictures of the old pictures that are showcased here. But I thought I'd share with you some of the history that is pointed out here. Like, for example, what Shafter is most known for and why it ended up being a ghost town, at least the original town is a ghost town, is that it was a huge spot for mining silver here in the Lone Star State. This here actually doesn't film too badly. It's showing a photo of the town of Shafter in the boom days, and then right below it what it looked like afterwards when it became a ghost town. From what I know, a prospector by the name of John W. Spencer ended up here sometime in the early 1860s, started mining for silver, found a rather plentiful vein here, and ended up starting, I think it was the Presidio Mining Company, to attract potential investors, and he's the one that actually started the town of Shafter. Apparently he named the town after a colonel that was over at Fort Davis, hoping to attract him as an investor. But I have no idea if the colonel ended up putting money into this operation or not. According to historical accounts, once Colonel Shafter had a sample from Spencer's claim assayed and discovered it did indeed contain profitable silver, he wasted no time in recruiting 2 others to buy the land surrounding Spencer's claim. These pictures here, if you can see beyond the reflection that's being cast by the light, are of some of the mine shafts and terminals that were part of the mining operations. And then I guess the other thing that's noteworthy about Shafter history happens to be centered around this family called the Brooks family. They actually have their own cemetery, which is right outside this door, and I'll take you out there in a second. According to the information here, the Brooks family got here through George, the patriarch, if you want to call him that. He ended up here, it says right here. 1893 is when he and his family moved to Shafter. According to this, he worked in the mine, operated an ice plant, and was the surveyor for many years. It's kind of interesting that you look around this whole memorial and it's basically centered on this family. I'm assuming the Brooks family had some major influence in the early days of Shafter. Otherwise, why would this whole thing be basically kind of like a family tree, genealogy of that family? It just kind of makes you wonder about the original Spencer, what happened to him. I haven't seen, granted I didn't go through every single thing here, but I didn't really see too much on him. So you got to kind of wonder what happened, why that is. According to one source, Spencer and his partners sold their claims to the mining company in exchange for 5,000 shares of company stock and $1,600 cash. After that, online historical records go silent as to John W. Spencer's fate. Well, I promised to take you out to their family cemetery, so let's do that now. Oh, looks like we can't exactly walk out here from there, but you can see the plots quite well from here. By the way, this spot is on the Texas Register of Historical Places, and it looks like we can enter the cemetery through this gate here. Like I said, this family must have had some major influence here in Shafter to have their own personal cemetery at the foot of the Three Sisters, which I guess is the name of the three mountain peaks that you see behind the cemetery. You'll see here the name Fuentes, which I know isn't a Brooks name, but according to what I read, there were some friends and family that were buried here also. Anyways, that's that. Why don't we move on to seeing some of the ruins of Shafter. One last thing, for those of you interested in reading upon the life of George Henry Brooks and his family, there is a rather thick book here that was made up, genealogy, family history, lots of stories and pictures to go along with it. So, kind of fascinating if you're interested in learning about one man's history. If you look off in the distance, just past this windmill, you can see part of the old mining equipment still standing here. Here you can see some of the ruins. We'll get closer. I think there's better examples of ruins of the original ghost town in other spots. As I had mentioned, the original town is a ghost town, but there are people still living in this area in Shafter, and so we just have to be mindful of that. And obviously there will be no peeking in any buildings because everything, from what I can tell, is behind fencing and has like no trespassing signs. But this building here was one that caught my eye that is still relatively intact. I'm guessing that might be a little bit newer construction given the condition of some of the other original buildings here. Now, something you'll notice about the landscape is that there are trees growing along here. And that's because there's actually a source of water here, a little spring of sorts. I don't know how far it flows or where it comes from. I just know that it kind of bubbles across the road. You can see it's not very deep today, but it does come from this direction and flows in this direction. And I find it totally amazing that here, basically in the desert, you've got this source of water, which made this the ideal location for the early settlers, for the mining that went on here. And it's cool, if you look, you can see even tiny minnows swimming here. So definitely a source of life. Interestingly enough, much of the water supplied to the residents of Shafter comes not from this creek, but from the well of the silver mine that started the town. These are some of the main ruins that you can see from the ground here. This is the closest we'll get to it because, and you know, with it being so crumbly, would you really want people, tourists, trampling around up in there? Probably not, considering this is a historic site. According to this monument, a man by the name of Milton Favor established the first Anglo-American owned ranch in the Big Bend. And it says it was established in the 50s, which at first you're thinking 1950, except if we look at the bottom of the monument, we can see this was erected in 1936. So obviously not the 1950s. And then directly across from this marker monument, we've got this.
The building up top with the Brooks Memorial on the wall, they showed some of the, I don't know if you call it bunk housing or housing that they lived in. That's what this reminds me of for how long it is. This piece over here looks like it was added on after, but if you look at the roof line, how long it was, it looks like one of the original buildings that people lived in while the mining was going full force.
Yeah, it's a cool building. If you look up, you can see a cupola up there, and that it was originally constructed out of adobe, and it's got, what, a tin roof on it?
Yeah, I'd like to get my hands on all that old tin.
Looks like it even has a carport. And then next to that, you can see a crumbling old adobe building. Kind of wonder if these adobe structures had suffered damage from that earthquake that hit Valentine. Oh, back, what was that, in the 1931? If they felt it down here. That's probably about, I would say, an hour's drive north and west of here. And then you can see the old church just peeking up over the top of that adobe that's crumbled down. Closer look at the church. You can see Marty walking up towards the highway there. Appears they still hold Mass here on the third Sunday of the month. And even not knowing Spanish, I don't think it's too hard to understand what those are. They're the 10 Commandments, by the way, in case you didn't know. Since my Spanish enunciation and pronunciation is really horrible, I won't attempt to read them to you, but be assured they are the 10 Commandments in Spanish. I recognize quite a few of the words, surprisingly. And then besides the old church, you still have some homes here. Some of them lived in, some of them not. Marty was telling me earlier that he had read that there was like a population of 30 or so. I don't recall personally. I had read it online, but I'll just pop that up there on the screen for you, the most recent info that I Googled. A few more houses here in Shafter. One of them appears to be for sale. I wouldn't mind owning a piece of property here, but only if it comes with the ability to go up on the old mountain and mine for silver. Surprisingly, after the silver mine closed, although its population declined for a time, Shafter remained a thriving community, with its 12 businesses supplying the needs of the military men stationed at Marfa Army Airfield and Fort V.A. Russell. However, after these two military bases farther north closed, business quickly dried up and Shafter became a ghost town.
In 1976, the original town site became designated as the Shafter Historic Mining District and was placed on the National Register of Historic Places.
How about this place? You'd have the Three Sisters for your backyard view. I know some of the people we know would have a really tough time coming out here, being out in the middle of nowhere with nothing to do, but I personally would not have a problem with that. I like it. Other than the sound of the traffic, I haven't heard anything. It's been quiet. I bet you can hear the coyotes at night. Check this out. This one comes with an outdoor privy. I really could have used that the other day when we were filming in Valentine. Okay, I said I wasn't going to take any peeks inside, but this one doesn't have any signs on it, and the temptation is just too great. Oh, look. Somebody left their old sombrero, chair, some folding chairs. Oh, well, that's a gem. An old hairdryer just sitting here. And then some kind of dresser, vanity type thing. Oh, this just looks like a bunch of junk piled in here. Okay, nothing to see here, folks. Time to move on. And my knight in shining armor awaits. Oh, at a quick glance, that looks like a snakeskin, right? Watch out, it might strike.